All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a look at globalization from another perspective. Yeah, we're going to take a look at the dark side of globalization. Think of Darth Vader in this case. All right, so we're going to look at the negatives of globalization. So make sure you get out your notes, follow the STORM philosophy for note taking, and sit back and enjoy. All right, so just a quick overview. What are we going to achieve today with the lecture? Well, we're going to recap globalization again, really take a look at it from another side, and then we're going to outline the negatives of globalization and really give you some detail as far as how globalization has impacted the world in a negative way. So, let's start off with another little quote here, this time from former President Jimmy Carter. So globalization, as defined by rich people, he's talking about us, or the Western world, is a very nice thing. You are talking about the internet, you are talking about cell phones, you're talking about computers. However, this doesn't affect 2/3 of the people of the world. Really what he's outlining, the have and have-nots. So think about that as we proceed through the lecture. So again, what is globalization? Well, again, it's the interconnectedness. So we've become so wound tight together, the spider web of connections, all those kind of visuals you can think of culture, of business, of technology, and unfortunately, negative actions. And that's what we're really going to outline. And so although we have, amazing fast food restaurants located everywhere we are, amazing technology, amazing different businesses coming into place, think about this. For every benefit that we receive, there's probably someone else in this world kind of being hurt by that benefit. Alright, so what are these negatives? Well, one is the loss or fear of loss of jobs. Another one is the loss of Canadian productivity. The exploitation of cheap labor. The increased environmental degradation we see around the world. The rise in unhealthy products being produced and therefore consumed, the spread of diseases around the world, again think of SARS and the swine flu epidemic, the increase in the income gap, the haves and the have-nots, and lastly the influence of multinational corporations on governments, or MNCs. So the first one is the loss or fear of loss. So many jobs are now able to be outsourced around the world. Any job that can really be done through little training, maybe low skill, and can be connected to the business world that's often operating in Europe or the Western world, North America. Those jobs are going overseas into nations that can provide labor at very low cost, and therefore many Canadian jobs, often in manufacturing, have gone overseas, and we've seen a huge decrease in these manufacturing jobs. The red line there outlines that over the last several years, we've seen the loss of Canadian jobs go down dramatically, and this is no different for many first world nations, and all of their manufacturing jobs have also decreased considerably. The next one is connected to the previous one of job loss, but it's slightly different in terms of we looking at this from a whole, from our economy standpoint, and that's the Canadian productivity. If all of these jobs are going overseas, then lots and lots of businesses are going overseas as well, and because of that, our productivity of our workforce, of our economy, is decreasing as well. So our foreign direct investment, or Canadian direct investment, is going to places like the United States, that's taking a huge chunk of this investment, and various other places around the world. And so all these businesses going overseas in various other countries, well, that's therefore hurting our economy in some ways, and we're losing productivity and therefore wealth and GDP as a result. And with businesses looking all around the world to provide a workforce for them to manufacture their products or provide their business in some way, many companies, unfortunately, are taking advantage of cheap labor. Many countries employ people for very, very low wages, far lower than the minimum wage we have here in Canada. And because of that, companies are taking advantage of that, and unfortunately we look at that as exploitation of cheap labor. Many countries employ child workers, which is totally wrong, horrible, but because of their lax employment standards and because of their economic situation, they employ these child laborers in many first world nations, and businesses are therefore taking advantage of that. So the next one is that environmental degradation is increasing rapidly. And all of this has to do with companies' bottom line. Their motive, their driving force behind their business operations is to increase profit, and to do so they're going to drive down costs. Well, one way you can drive down costs is to move to countries that have very lax environmental regulations, where you can produce products very cheaply because you don't have to worry about ridding yourself of your waste, of your byproduct in safe and environmentally safe ways, and therefore you can just simply pollute, throw your sludge and any other polluted chemical out the back door into rivers and waterways and landfills, and you get rid of your toxins in that way. And so we see many cities around the world increased pollution levels considerably since globalization, or modern day globalization, has really taken over. So with the drive to attract business investment in countries around the world, many countries again have very lax standards, not just with the environment, not just with employment, but in terms of the products that you can manufacture and the ingredients you can use in those products. And so what we see is a lot of countries being open to businesses manufacturing products with unhealthy or unsafe ingredients. We see this with a lot of toys that have come over from China, only to discover that there's lead paint in those toys, and therefore if children consume the toy in some way or bite the toy and the paint comes off, they are now ingesting lead, and we know that has serious health effects. Another one is world chromium production. Chromium is a chemical. It is not a very safe chemical, and many countries around the world allow its production, and therefore, again, due to modern day globalization, businesses look everywhere to decrease the cost of production and allow themselves to increase their profits. One of the things that we said right from the get-go was the interconnectedness of culture, of technology, of business. And because of these connections, many people have to travel all over the world on a daily basis to visit foreign business operations, or to simply just travel. Because of this, we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of infectious diseases and the spread of these diseases. We saw this years ago with SARS, where again an individual who came from China to Toronto brought with them the SARS virus that led to an outbreak of SARS in Toronto, and we saw a great medical I wouldn't say catastrophe, but definitely concern. We're seeing this more and more now with swine flu, with bird flu, and other infectious diseases. Not to say that infectious diseases didn't spread before around the world. Many plagues spread like this, and various other diseases. The original HIV virus spread. But we're seeing with modern day globalization, the spread of disease is much greater and can be much more catastrophic, and therefore we're seeing a much greater investment in curing these infectious diseases because of the concern we have for the spread. And the last one is this increase in the income gap, the haves versus the have-nots. Since modern day globalization, what we've seen is incomes rise dramatically. We see the rich get much richer. We see individuals become wealthy beyond their dreams, and that's all very positive. Unfortunately, what we're not seeing is that an equitable distribution of this wealth. We're seeing those who already had money gain the ability to make more money due to globalization and the increase of markets, so they can sell their products. Businesses get larger and therefore employ workers at higher paying jobs who already had fairly well paying jobs before. But unfortunately, the have-nots, they're not getting those same opportunities. And so one of the things that we're seeing is this increase in the income gap. Many countries, Canada included, before the 90s and then post 90s or post late 2000s, we've seen this income gap increase dramatically, and it's continuously widening every year, and it's causing some concern as far as what are we going to do about it. The last one, the multinational corporations, one that we often don't think of when we think of Canada and our business environment. We often look to the United States in terms of the influence that corporations have, such as the super PACs and various other lobbying firms that are actually just companies funneling millions of dollars into various political parties, and therefore they're able to influence legislation and state laws and so on and so forth. But we're actually seeing this considerably grow in Canada as well. And in the last decade, a huge increase in the lobbying efforts and company efforts to get rid of climate change regulations and greater environmental regulations. So it's an unfortunate thing. It's a trend that we're seeing more and more of, and it's something that is caused, again, modern day globalization, more companies coming here to invest. They want to influence regulations that can increase their profits. So something to keep an eye on. All right, so we've talked about globalization. We've looked at the positives. We've looked at the negatives now. So think about it. What is greater? Are there more benefits to globalization than negatives? Or do you believe, after watching this, that there's more negatives to globalization? One thing is for certain. There are both positives and negatives, and a great amount of people who have benefited from globalization and a great amount of people who have suffered severe hardship as a result. So I want you to think about both the positives and negatives when we're thinking about globalization. Don't ever look at it just from one side. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this lecture. Here's your lasting question, a question to walk away with. With all of these negatives, what does the future hold for Canada, for the world, for you individually, for people who are living in Africa and other third world nations? What does it hold for them? All right, so make sure you have your notes in order. You've written down your own discussion question, and that's it. That's all. That's everything. We'll see you tomorrow.